Yep. Mayor Parker?
Here.
Mr. Jacobs?
Here.
Mr. Strackhoff?
Here.
Ms. Christie? Here. Mr. Azaleas?
Here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. D?
Here.
Mr. Zupnik?
Here.
Ms. Patras? Here. And Ms. Gutschall?
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Burnersville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers and posted in the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 12, 2018.
Please stand for the flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have 2 sets of minutes that we need to approve. March 8th. Do I hear a motion for March 8th?
Motion approved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? Okay. April 5th.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone abstain or object? No, seeing none, they're approved. Okay, we also have several resolutions. We have Lamington Farm Golf Club Resolution 2018-004. Have you had a chance to look at those? Yes. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
Okay. Mayor Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Strackhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Azaleas?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Z?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Patras? Aye. And Ms. Gutschall?
Aye. We have our annual report from the Board of Adjustment, Resolution 2018-005. Have you had a chance to look at that?
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
That will be Mr. Strackhoff? Or actually, no. Is that just Board of Adjustment?
Just Board of Adjustment.
Okay, all right. Mr. Strackhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Azaleas?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. D?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Patras? Aye. And Ms. Gutschall?
Aye. Also, we have the Cancer Support Community of Central New Jersey, the resolution for that. Do I hear a motion for that resolution? It's a continuation.
Just a one-year extension.
Yeah, extension.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Strackhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Azaleas?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. D?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Patras? Aye. And Ms. Gutschall?
Aye. Okay, this is the time of the meeting. If there's anyone here who would like to discuss something that's not on the agenda, seeing no one, we will continue. We have a determination of completeness. I guess you're prepared, Mark, to
Yes.
go over that?
Sure. This is the application for Jardiniere preliminary and final site plan. The application mostly submitted the required materials or a few minor checklist waivers that we have no objection to. There's one item that I think the board should at least consider, and that is the architectural plans. Floor plans were submitted, but no elevations were submitted as required. So that will have to be a waiver, checklist waiver, and provided there's no changes, I don't see an issue with it. I don't know if they're planning to change the exterior or not.
It was my understanding from Paul that they had no changes. So
Okay.
I think that waiver would be in order.
So if the
Yes.
board would entertain it, it'd be a motion to waive the, and this is just for the zoning board members, motion to waive the remaining items for completeness and to deem the application complete so we can do the hearing later on tonight with just the Board of Adjustment members. Is there such a motion?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Streckoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie?
Aye.
Mr. Adelius?
Recuse.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Patras?
Aye.
And Ms. Gutschall?
Aye. It's been deemed complete, and we'll hear that tonight. Okay, I guess the next thing on the agenda is our master plan reexamination. And Frank, you're up.
First, Frank asked me to just summarize for you what
Okay.
this next step is. And I know you've been you worked a lot last week on a master plan subcommittee report of a subcommittee, and you might have a lot of future work on master plan amendments and/or possibly, but not too likely, a full master plan. But what you're doing tonight is reviewing and discussing what you want to put in the re-examination report, the master plan re-examination report, which is not the master plan itself and is not in and of itself an amendment to the master plan. That's a little confusing, odd, but it's just, that's a different subject. And what it entails is to review with your planner a series of questions, answer those questions, and make some recommendations. It does not in and of itself constitute an amendment to the master plan, and it has to be done once every 10 years, but can be done at any public meeting of the board at any time. And Frank will summarize what the last one says and maybe some of the ideas he would have for you to focus on this. We want to get a re-examination report completed by the planning board, the re-examination report, I think before June, so doing it in May would be convenient and would make sense, and it is feasible. So.
Thank you, Tom. For some reason, there is a tendency in the planning profession and in the planning processes to have these iterative processes, and any of you that remember cross-acceptance, where they asked us the same question 50 times for the state plan, or some of these other things like the re-examination, where we have to go back and look at a whole series of answers we gave to questions last time and then update all those answers to today. I tried to cut through, rather than starting in and looking at the 2008 re-examination, which is the one that we are updating here, which could have taken us a lot of time and I think probably not well spent. I'll summarize by saying the process we're going to go through here will involve looking back at this 2008 plan fairly briefly and identifying some priorities there, looking at issues that have been identified since the 2008 plan that we want to talk about this time around, and talking about whether or not redevelopment planning would be recommended by the planning board is one of those questions that we'll be answering. But as a process, it's frequently commented upon that there's an advantage in a re-examination report to figuring out what zoning changes you want to make and putting them in the re-examination, because there is a less burdensome notice requirement when it's in your re-examination. By the same token, because policies in Bedminster have been fairly well settled for a pretty long time, and if in fact there will be any significant changes to those policies that are going to result from what happens next because of the times we live in now and changing times, the same transparency and public engagement that the township has always been involved in every planning change that's been made of any significance needs to be accorded to this process too. So between now and June, we're not going to recommend a whole bunch of zoning changes. We're going to identify some areas for further study in the master plan that might warrant a master plan amendment. Some of those likely will be subjects that were hit on by the master plan review committee in the report they gave you last week. Your subcommittee, re-examination subcommittee, has gone through a whole series of issues that I will be summarizing, and we'll have a draft report that they will discuss with me in the next week or two, ready for you to review and, if you find it acceptable, adopt at the May meeting, as Tom said. We can adopt it at the June meeting and still fall within the time frame, but we want to make sure it's not last minute. So, which to a certain extent it's a little last minute now, but I believe knowing the recommendations of the Master Plan Review Committee, the ad hoc committee, was an important part of this process. I'd hate for that to have come in right after we finish saying whatever we're going to say next. So what I'd like to do tonight, and I think we can do it pretty quickly, and I have to apologize now to Richard because I had to borrow Tom's copy to get a copy for myself. Terry, if you could do that, I really appreciate it. I apologize, but leaving the room to make copies is like a half-hour endeavor, right? So what we're going to do tonight is look briefly back at what these recommendations from 2008 were, talk about a little bit whether you think these are things that should continue to be or shouldn't be priorities going forward, and if so, are they really important or are they not very important? So that we can end up really focusing in on recommendations on the things that we think are really important. So if we start looking back on Table 1, the 2000 reexamination report, here we now we're going back to another iteration, identified, it was very thoroughly prepared, looked at a whole wide range of things, and it came up with 34 separate recommendations for changes to the master plan or land management ordinance. All of the 34 changes that were recommended were enacted either in the master plan or in the zoning, except the 7 items that are in Table 1. And of the 7 items that are in Table 1, which we'll talk briefly about, you may think some of these things are a good idea to continue to pursue, or you may think the reason nothing ever happened on them is because nothing's going to happen on them. And I think our job is really to look at the public health, safety, and general welfare aspects of these things. So if they have a big impact on public safety, they probably deserve a higher priority. So in Table 1, the recommendation from 2000 for an aesthetic impact analysis to be part of an environmental impact statement was looking to create a way where you could actually, and it talks about it, a 3-dimensional terrain model, which you can build on a computer, would be part of the evidence that would be provided to the board in an environmental impact statement, so you would see what was going to happen to the landscape as a result of development. I look back at that today and I think that's pretty onerous. We get a pretty good idea from looking at plans what that is, and if you ask what's that going to add to the cost of an application, it's going to be a significant cost addition. So my sense right now is if we conclude that there's a reason why that's, as we look at all these factors, if there's a reason why that's a good idea, it's going to need to overcome the burden of being a costly good idea. So I'm going to call that low priority at this point, or no priority. If you want to say none, that's even easier. Take it off the list if you say none. You've recommended in the past, and it's always a good practice, that the Board of Ed and the Planning Board communicate so that the Board of Ed knows what your policies might lead to, and you know what capacities they have to accommodate any growth that might come to town. There have been lots of informal discussions. I've obviously had conversations with members of the school administration over the years, but it would be a good idea to set up a dialogue among members, Planning Board members and Board of Ed members, because I think there are fluency and currency in certain issues on your level and on their level where you both have a sort of an expert knowledge, but it's a different expert knowledge. What you know expert stuff about is different from what they do, and I think cross-pollinating, that's a good idea. So I would suggest that that remains a priority, and probably at least a medium priority, something we ought to be trying to find a way to do. Stop me when you disagree. The scenic resource assessment was a technique that allowed us to identify, particularly in the R10 district and at gateway locations in town, how to manage development so that it didn't obscure or destroy scenic vistas of a variety of types. We went through a process of characterizing the entire township by its scenic vista characteristics, and a scenic resource management plan was completed. Members of the board who were on the board when this was done may recall that there was another board member who was a professional planner, Dennis Hidasco, who was influential in the methodology that was developed for that. It was very creative. It also was perceived at the time that the plan was finished as being fairly complicated, and I think the question was, again, what cost are we adding and what benefit do we get back? So there is a scenic resource management plan that was fully developed that you can read a copy of, and you might want to take another look and see if there's anything in there that looks like it should be revisited, because I think there might be. I think you'd find that there'd be some interesting things there. But it set up a regimen that was going to be very demanding on the applicant, and it was sort of making the application a little bit of a slave to this concern when there's lots of big concerns on these applications. So I would suggest that that's something we're not going to resolve anything on between now and June, but we will circulate that. If you take a look and you find that there's anything in there you think you'd like to talk more about, I'd like to hear that. I'll send those to you. When we talk about road design standards, there's really no need for reinventing anything except we have the character of unpaved roads in the community is largely perceived to be our rural character. And if we were to suggest that all those roads get paved, I'd be thrown out of here. Some of you would probably be thought of less highly by your neighbors. And at the end of the day, I think what we really need to think about is, do we need to do something different than we're doing now so that those roads are serviceable, that washouts and other environmentally damaging occurrences can be somehow minimized because we do something less than paving, but something more than just scraping the road again and seeing how long it stays in place. So that's not so much a
Can I ask
planning...
a question, Frank?
Sure.
So is that only about the gravel roads and making it, or is it how we might modify the road construction in the various districts?
Oh, the way it's written, it's about appropriate road standards for every type of road, not just...
Okay.
But what I was calling your attention to was the fact that unless there is a recognition that, let's say, some towns might have overly wide road requirements that end up with people going too fast on long straight stretches. And so road diets and other things that are being imposed on those types of roads would be new road design standards that you might impose on them.
This definition includes where we have curbs, where we don't have curbs, where we have sidewalks, where we don't have sidewalks. That, does it extend to beyond the curb line, or is it just the...
You know, when you think of what the complete streets mentality, the policies that are being developed all around the country so that we use our circulation network more completely for all the various users and all of their various needs, which means walking and bicycles and, you know, all types of transportation. And you can't just throw them all together and assume it's all going to work. So as you say, Rick, if we don't have sidewalk standards, but we're going to dump a bunch of pedestrians someplace and you don't have to build a sidewalk, that won't make a lot of sense. I don't think that's the condition we're in right now. But if you think looking again at more broadly at these road standards, which Paul Farrar's office basically has it on the tip of their tongue, I think that might be just satisfy yourself that there's no good that we could do right there. So I would make that sort of a medium priority and ask Paul for more input.
Okay.
We are regulated by the state, by the RSIS we talked about last week, residential site improvement standards. And so there are certain minimum and maximum standards in the state of New Jersey that are applicable to all residential development, not
Right.
necessarily commercial development or industrial. So, but within that framework, there's ways to do certain de minimis exceptions and certain state approved standards. So, I'm not thinking of any right now for you, but that might be something you talk about over the years. All this would be is maybe a general recommendation, definitely not a policy changing document.
Frank, with regard to road standards, especially for the rural, unpaved roads, who are our experts? Is it someone that we should lean on, Paul Ferrara, to give us advice as a board, or
Yes.
our...
Yeah, that's the right answer.
Our public works
But I don't want to...
I couldn't tell you how to build a unpaved road.
Yeah, you're right, and we have miles and miles, and we have very skilled township engineer team and DPW, and it's amazing. So,
Yeah, the DPW does do an amazing job, so I don't want anybody to think I'm saying they can't cover this.
yeah, it's amazing, it's amazing. So if you like it, just stick with what you got.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Frank, do you see anything that other towns are doing that we're a little bit out of step with? Or vice versa?
On rural roads, you're talking about?
Yeah,
the rural-
on any of
You
them,
know,
on any of the roads that are considered in here.
When I'm in Hoboken next Tuesday, I don't think I'll see any unpaved roads. To be honest with you, Mayor, I don't see
You
many
might see more
unpaved roads.
dirt. They'd be at the bottom of potholes, though.
Yeah, no, there really aren't towns that I work in that have the prevalence, and and want to continue. You know, what tends to happen is traffic increases and unpaved roads get paved because people complain. They want not to drive their Maserati over. Something happens when you move into Bedminster, that aura surrounds the R10 zone. So you don't care if the Maserati gets a couple of minutes looking at it.
The Washboard Road doesn't matter so much.
Not so much.
SUV now.
Yeah, right.
Gotta get rid of the low ground clearance.
No, I just want to follow up on Rich's comment about, for certainly, Burnsville had an issue with the expensive curbing a lot of the roads they have there, and that became a big issue in Burnsville. And also on the sidewalks, you know, I'm going to ask a question, and this is not rhetorical, but where do we require sidewalks and where do we not require sidewalks?
Your subdivision standards have provisions for sidewalks in the higher density zones, so you don't require them in the R10 when somebody does a subdivision, but you do require them in the R1 and the R3, I think. So you require them when someone comes in and tears down a building and puts up a new commercial building in one of the Village of Bedminster or Plaquemine. That would be
So it's commercial, it's
new subdivisions.
it's VN, it's R1,
And retrofitting generally happens when there's a government grant program around.
So is there any application on a lot that's in a village area or R1 where there is no sidewalk, that application or that approval automatically comes with requirement for putting a sidewalk in?
If we ask for
Some
it.
don't?
Yeah, sometimes there are people, sometimes in certain circumstances, board members can be persuaded that this is not the place for it, even though we have a right to it. And other places, it would be a horrible decision to say, you know, the example would be there's a sidewalk on either lot on either side of you, and the only part that's missing is in front of your property.
And RSIS has sidewalk standards that apply depending upon the density. I think it's anything under 2 acre, and then it has certain standards for it that have to do with one side or two sides. And that's an area where maybe a de minimis exception is appropriate if the board grants it. But you can never require more than the RSIS requires, and you can expect it to require exactly what it requires. So, but that's for residential.
Understood, but you know, I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking of going from where Rich and I live, walking to the library,
That
or
could-
going to Quick Check.
RSIS.
Whether, unless you're cutting
Or
through
have your
someone's
kids walk
backyard.
or have your kids walk to school.
Right.
RSIS would not have allowed that, but it wasn't in effect when the house was developed.
Well, naive question, what happens if you rezone and say, we'd like to have sidewalks in a neighborhood that doesn't have them, who pays for that?
If a new development takes place, the developer does, but if you require it in a zoning ordinance and the area exists, no one does it and no one is required to. But if the township has so much money it wants to spend it on it, the township can so decide, but it has no duty to. So.
And I don't know if you recall this, Larry, and I don't, you know, digress here, but in our neighborhood, money was escrowed to put sidewalks in at some point. And then we ended up giving the money back because it wasn't a popular notion to pursue it. And I just thinking as we go forward, if we want to change the character of some of these neighborhoods, and we talk about pattern design and, you know, maybe promoting some retail development along some of these thoroughfares, things like that, we may think sidewalks is a good idea, but if that's all it is a good idea, it may never get done because it's going to add that much more cost to the development and so forth and so on. But if we think it's a good idea as we attempt to rezone some of these areas or, you know, create some definition around what the character of those neighborhoods may become, if it doesn't have any tooth, it's never going to get done.
For a new development, it will.
It will.
And then, one of the things that a lot of towns with town centers do is if they really want to have sidewalks in their town center, they develop a plan. I'm not saying you should, but they basically develop what's called a shovel-built plan. This is the plan that we'd ideally like to have if the state of DOT was nice enough to fund the whole thing. And then they leave that plan on the shelf and say, this plan could be built. And then they dream, and sometimes the dream comes true, that the DOT...
Well, and in
Let
fact,
you build the sidewalks that you want and the lights you want. or-
it came true here because your hike and bike trail was $7.5 million worth of federal and state appropriations
Yeah,
that built
you are one of
those
the most
overpasses.
amazing Trails that anybody
But it doesn't mean there's a sidewalk every place it needs to be. And I think Richard's question really implicates the larger policy question that we're going to spend a little time on before we come up with the answer, which is, what kind of life should the villages have? And by that I mean, what kind of residential life and what kind of commercial life? The transformation of most of Bedminster Village from homes to offices, a few businesses, but more offices than not, means that at night, except for the 3 or 4 houses that are still houses, the lights are all out. So in terms of the kind of place that Bedminster Village is at night, it doesn't feel like there's any eyes on the street. So if you look at some of the historical approaches to what makes a nice, good, safe place that people want to be and feel safe, it's not like I feel unsafe in Bedminster Village, don't get me wrong, not at all. But the feeling of if people lived upstairs like they used to and there were lights on in the bedrooms at night, there'd be some life on the street just because people lived there. If there is a demand for retail uses at the neighborhood level like that, where there should be some possibly mixed use kind of places in Bedminster Village that aren't there today, what's our vision for them? And are they stores right on the sidewalk? Are they close, like in the historical pattern of buildings close to the street? Probably a good idea. But I mean, so there are much broader questions of what does it mean if you're going to try to do something about that. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think we have to talk through the question of how good is it working the way it is? What changes have occurred over time? Or are they good or bad? If they weren't great, what changes would be good looking forward? And I think repopulating the downtown, you're going to find people who, as the demand for offices continues to diminish, residential rents are very competitive in most markets now with what you might get for a commercial rental. So there's going to be interest again in seeing some of those upper floors turning back into residential use, I think, but not if we don't encourage it somehow. We permit it. It's not like you couldn't do it. The VN zone does allow you to have a residential and a commercial use on the same lot. But that's, like I say, that's...
And these are kind of big picture issues, so the re-exam report might just talk about, look at your road standards and smart streets. The big picture of whether to change a master plan area or a village area or a big ordinance change, that's really more in the category of a master plan amendment and a new zone or a new ordinance, not really the province of this re-examination report. That's a good way to distinguish the two. You don't amend the master plan by just doing a re-examination report.
But the re-examination could say, we're onto something here. You should look further at this and determine if the master plan should be amended. And that's one of the things that this re-exam will tell somebody is a follow-up step. That's part of what they're trying to get out of this process. So that was very useful. And that'll come back. That will be back.
Sorry for the...
No, that's great.
Can I step back for a second?
Sure.
So if we put something in the re-examination report, are we bound to it?
Not
I
at
mean, if
all.
we say this is a high priority and then it doesn't actually materialize.
No, and it's not only not bound to it, it's your re-examination report. It might even be a recommendation, but it's not an amendment to the master plan. It's not the master plan at all. It's kind of strange, but that's the truth. Okay, you can merge the two sometimes, but I don't recommend that here on this occasion. And then the master plan is only a recommendation. It's this board's master plan, not the committee's master plan. We're lucky to have the mayor and committee member on our board, planning board. That's true in every town in New Jersey. And the committee alone, by majority, decides whether to change the ordinances that the master plan recommends or that the board might recommend. And even if you recommended a change, the committee might not adopt your recommended the ordinance change. It might not you might adopt it in a different way, and you might they always refer it back to you, and that's a whole different process. That's the referral process. So in a way, this is like, the re-exam report is like a series of recommendations. And it's also to yourself that we might look at this in the future. And the good part about re-examinations is you can do it any time. You could a year later say, hey, no, I really don't like that one. I want to change that one. I want to do a new re-examination. You could just do that.
But the ultimate irony in this whole thing is that if you want to do a master plan amendment, which would be the legitimate basis for a rezoning, you have to go through public notice, all that stuff, public hearing. If you want to do something where you rezone the R10 zone tomorrow to some different category and you put it in this report, I can walk in with this report the night of the meeting with nobody having seen it before. It had no notice requirement, and the next day you can change the zoning in the R10 zone without notifying everybody that you'd otherwise have to notify, which is pretty nuts. So it's a powerful document, but in terms of binding you to things, it's more an agenda for future action if it makes sense in the future when you look back at it. So we're good there, I think. The next one was strategies to promote the use of mass transit and increased bus access. Now, I mean, our local example would be, what is it that gets more bus service, gets bus service into the villages that we don't have? Is it the combination of population and what types of businesses? I mean, the train station in Far Hills, some people say being on the Raritan Valley line gives you a lot more transportation utility than you get out of the Gladstone line. But the truth of the matter is you can get a train to work in New York and get a train home at the end of the day. And we've got that sitting right to Bedminster Village, pretty much in walking distance from our property line. And we haven't done a whole lot to try to incentivize any particular use of that facility. Now, it may be that that's really, other than land use policies, in other words, putting a lot of housing right next to the train station, maybe there isn't a big role for the planning board in that. Maybe those are initiatives that the governing body might be able to do more about than the planning board. What I don't want is just a bunch of platitudes where we say this great thing, but there's not really anything anybody can do about it that's going to matter. We can't measure performance. We won't know we got it done. But it sounds good. Promote the use of mass transit. I mean, of course, that sounds good. Is that something we can do anything meaningful about, or should that not be on our list?
Wasn't there a bus service of some kind that died because no one used it?
I think that was the reason, yeah. But it was the link sort of thing, the county sponsored,
Right.
individualized
So it
service.
seems like that's not so popular.
So maybe we'll call that low. And when the report gets written, obviously the things that are going to rise to the surface will not be the lowest priorities. Something that came up in 2000 and again in the recommendations in 2008 related to trying to maintain farmland in our town, partly by being encouraging to the equestrian community and their needs. And as you know, we have long been a community where our agricultural landscape has lots of horses on it. It's had more at some times, but it's still got plenty compared to most places. But what we were looking to here was, are there ways through zoning to do things that would make it more hospitable to the equestrian community and equine interests? So it sounds like one of the recommendations from this ad hoc committee was in that same vein. So I suspect that this is something, since it has utility in the R10 zone and could continue to advance those interests, that we want to look into further and probably even call it a high priority.
And you and the committee did some things on that subject over the past few years about coverage and blur ratio that help
Right.
incentivize large equestrian barns and similar facilities. So you've sort of been doing that. You always support yourself.
But we made a more generous accommodation for some of those things than we had before in terms of our floor area. That's a good point, Tom. So those items from 2000 that were looked at in 2008, that we sorted down to this small list now, found their way into the recommendations in some portions of the 2008, which is Table 2. And so what I've really said here is, did we do what the recommendation was in 2008? First one was, with regard to the scenic landscape, require R10 or other gateway location applicants for development to detail the scenic attributes that they will impact, and to come up with a plan to manage the change in landscape character so that the gateway could be nicer when we're done rather than somehow compromised, or that the visual character of development in the open fields would be, there are preferred methods of locating homes, whether you're the landowner or the viewer from the public street. There are advantages to some of the corner locations that can tend to minimize the feeling that the landscape has been commanded over by the house, the large dwelling. So nothing was done since 2008 on that particular item. One of the items that was included in that recommendation related to equestrian trails, and we've seen where new owners are not always hospitable to continuing to allow horses across their property. I suspect that finding a way to encourage the continued availability of those trails, which are a cultural remnant of a time where you could ride horses every place unrestricted, is probably something that should be a fairly high priority as part of that equestrian community business. But in terms of the scenic landscape protection requirements, that would mean you would change the environmental impact statement, like I said before. I think we can attend to that sort of thing through the typical design review process, and there aren't a whole lot of hard and fast rules that I can recommend to you where you say, this is how you have to develop at that particular location, because every place is different. So we'll say low for the top portion of that and high for the equestrian trail portion.
And by the way, on that subject, the convenience is you have a master plan study that tells you some of the key locations, so it's easy to tie that and look at that when somebody does something in that area and just discuss it in the hearing of the planning board. It may not have teeth that are mandatory, but it has, it's called vision.
That's an excellent point, because the fact that that document was not adopted into the master plan doesn't mean for any reason that you can't use the information that it provides to, number one, identify what's important, and then number two, come up with a strategy that addresses it that may be one of the things that were recommended there.
And it's pretty visual. You can see the area, you can sort of see the picture of where the view is that's trying to be protected, and you can work together with people to protect it.
Next item was lighting, and there's always, almost every master plan review, there are some issues related to lighting that need to be discussed. Paul says last time we were talking about changing the lighting for signs, among other things, and we did make changes to the signs, but he thinks that maybe with regard to LED or other types of lighting that we need to update the lighting provisions of the ordinance. So I would think that that's probably at least a medium priority, because between the glare impacts or the concerns about not having enough light, getting that part right is probably a high priority. The conservation plan amendment, the word sustainability has become tossed around so much. We all probably have heard something about the LEED rating system that, we have a couple of great LEED buildings right up the road in Bedminster at the Willow School. We actually have a platinum building in addition to the gold building. But what we've learned over the years is that you don't really want to require a developer to have to meet the provisions of a system like that. And I say that for a number of reasons. The biggest one is there's the commissioning part of that process. If you do LEED properly, it doesn't end the day you build the building. And it has a lot of other components to it. And it's become a system where a friend of mine who was one of the people who came up with the idea to have the U.S. Green Building Council created at his dining room table, said the problem is that everybody got into just adding up points. They stopped thinking about what good design was, and they thought about, how do I get to silver? What do I pile on to get there? And so he was pretty down on trying to require that of anybody, and I thought, well, the author of it thinks it's not a great aim. In this vein, I think in the sphere
In the
of-
sense of being mandatory and being...
through the regulatory process.
Proven by an entity. But in the sense of good design, I hope people will do it, and you should encourage.
So at this point, we're going to say that's a low priority. The next one were the deer fence regulations, which were a very serious issue when we talked about it back in 2008. I'm not sure how that ever reconciled itself. I think there were right-to-farm issues where the people that needed them most could do them because they could do it through the right to farm, but Paul didn't have a complete answer to how that resolved itself. I don't get the feeling that there's any clamoring for new deer fence regulations at this point.
It seemed that tended to morph into a deer management plan that was kicked around in various forms and sometimes more successfully than others, and I think the emphasis went over to environmental to work on that.
They ever implemented anything, Mr. Mayor?
Well, we came up with concrete guidelines for it that have to this day never been implemented.
All right, but that's not on our plate anymore. That's a good thing to know. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think that's the right answer.
Well, in the ad hoc report, 25% of the farmer's crop is lost by the deer. I mean, if we're trying to promote that, Mr., wouldn't you want to have something?
So in other words, is the deer fence an issue for the agricultural community that means we still have to have it on the table?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
That's a thought.
Just, Nick, just to give you the quick and dirty version of how that came down, about 6 years ago, there was some clamor for some transparency on whether we had a deer management program or we didn't, and what it was like. So we spent about a year crafting very carefully a deer management plan, and the deer management program was an idea that you would screen and encourage hunting on township land, but under a very structured, or a very rigid structure. So you knew who was going in there, you knew when they were going in there, it was thoroughly marked, nobody was wandering onto a trail and get met with somebody with a crossbow or whatever. And it would be done deliberately on given days. Yeah, maybe they'd wear shirts like yours. And there was a whole structure for doing such. And a committee member that's not with us anymore was going to take that on, and there were some other members of the community that were going to take that on. And the structure is there, but nobody has picked up the ball and run with it. It is there to be implemented. We just need the people, the volunteers to do it.
But if the government doesn't make an issue about it, I guess no one would pick it up, right? I mean.
Well, the problem is the program we have relies on volunteers. It's relying on hunters coming out of the community that wish to hunt those lands and them to be screened. So.
Should our website be looking for such people? Or?
I would almost think Rod and Gun Club, Somerset County, something like that could be of use in a situation like that. I don't know if the organization even exists, but it's something to look at.
Yep, the criticism before that was that if you knew somebody, you're buddies with somebody, wink and a nod, you can go use township land as your own personal hunting ground. And that didn't cut it for me. Yeah. And we needed to have transparent and objective measures for just that. So I wish it was a little further along than it was, but there's a structure out there ready to be used.
You would think if you were going to do it in Somerset County Park Rangers would be involved in some way, shape, or form.
Well, that was a part of it. We studied other towns. I think Berners Township has a hunting program. There are towns that pay for it. There are towns that come out and have deer culling programs where they will pay sharpshooters to come in and take X amount of deer out, and you pay for that. And that is certainly something the township could do. But I think we chose the idea that there would be plenty of volunteers, and at the time there were plenty of volunteers that claimed they wanted to do it. And when we said, here's the program,
one showed up.
We heard a lot of crickets rather than deers. So, like I said, I wish it was a little more vital, and maybe there are ways that we can make it more vital again and revisit it. But it's certainly a need out there. We have too many deer, and that I think that was not disputed. It's bad for the foliage. It's bad for our automobile traffic.
Ultimately, it's bad for them.
Yeah. You do not have a healthy population when there's no predators.
I have a question in my mind. I don't understand jack about deer, but if you thin the herd like in the western parts of the township, we're a little bit more remote, a little bit more rural, etc., will the herds that are closer to the roads and the thoroughfares, etc., move where there's less interference from human beings and things like that? Is that kind of a natural progression? Or, you could spend a lot of time and effort kind of thinning the herd in the western part of the county, you're still going to have problems with traffic here in, where the people are
There are
hitting
experts
them with
that'll
their
tell
cars.
you about migration habits and how far a deer will actually go, whether they'll go more than a couple miles from where they were born. I live in the part of town that butts Bridgewater, and boy, there's plenty of deer in Bridgewater. But I'll also tell you, deer absolutely seem to know when hunting season starts, and when, there are rules around hunting. After dark, no more hunting. Across the street from where I live, as soon as it's dusk, I can see dozens of deer in an open field. They're not dumb. So they kind of know a little bit about how it works. Now, whether they'll move, they're not smart enough to stay away from the roads, but...
But, to some extent, that it comes back to the issue that's raised here is deer fencing. And there's positives with deer fencing, and there's a whole lot of negatives with deer fencing because it creates... it creates displacement. So you displace deer from a fenced property and you're just pushing them on to other properties, pushing closer to a more densely populated area, towards road systems. I have very mixed feelings about pushing a deer fence provision just because of what happens next, and unless it's fully thought out.
And Paul points out to us that through a farm gets to use farmland rules and the Farm Act provisions and basically preemption to be able to put up the fences they need to do to farm. So
Protect the
you
property.
might think you're regulating something, and in fact, it is unregulatable, but that's
But
just...
that also raises the issue, one farm does it,
what does
and
the
another
impact-
farm doesn't, or it doesn't have the wherewithal to do it, then you're getting an incomplete protection from the deer.
You also fragment the environment.
Yeah, because other animals can't get through.
But on the other side, if you ever go over to the Duke Estate, there is a very powerful demonstration of they took a significant acreage and they fenced it off for deer, and you can see the difference in the foliage. So,
But what that is showing is, it wasn't to promote necessarily fence off the entire properties.
no, it's just showing you the difference. Yeah.
Managed property and what grows, and I know there's an environmental expert over there, what happens when you take deer out of the equation. You get the undergrowth, you get the varied plant, and when you get the varied plant, you're going to get the varied animal life. A lot changes. Even looking at what they're doing on the Black River, they're trying to do that program to encourage reduce the temperature of the Black River. Well, the studies are shown that a lot of the undergrowth that would provide shade and cool the water down, well, that gets chomped down by, and Scott knows this perhaps better than anyone else. So it just,
Well, 70
it
years
spirals.
It's complicated.
70 years ago, you couldn't find a white-tailed deer in North Jersey. It's changed so much since they came back. With the rapid development and the way things were hunted back then, there just weren't deer around. And when certain protections and seasons were implemented, they tried to manage the resource, and they were so successful that you opened Pandora's box.
So fencing, to me, is
Not the
tough, unless you have a comprehensive plan.
Well, and if the goal is to protect farms, and the farms are protected already by the,
They can protect
they,
themselves.
they have the ability to protect themselves under the rules that govern farms, then maybe there's no
Right, and
reason
they-
to get involved.
And farms also have the right to take deer down out of season.
I think they might be allowed to shoot at night, but I'm not sure. Is that right, Steve? Is there a
I
certain...
suspect they
Jack
can.
Lantern?
I don't have personal knowledge of that.
Nobody knows. They do.
Lights in Bedminster, huh? That's interesting.
They're the few people that seem to have flashlights and shotguns at the same time.
Well, it ties back to the lighting program.
So if we can keep moving along. When Paul and I spoke about the golf course standards, to the extent that golf was not a permitted use in the R10 zone before we wrote an ordinance for that, we've talked for years about the fact that we took the Princeton ordinance for Jasna, which was one of the more rigorous ordinances in the state, and we made it more demanding. That was before any of these recommendations that you see here, some of which also have been subsequently included. We've had the establishment of a municipal monitoring committee where members of the board and other township personnel go out to the course, look at existing on-site conditions on a regular basis. So I think in terms of managing golf courses, we've probably gone above and beyond, and I don't think we need to be talking about any changes there. I wouldn't make that a priority any longer. The Ramil Sewer Service Area, we've had conversations over the years back and forth that there are a number of neighborhoods, Ski Hill is probably a good example, that are up Route 206 above Bedminster Village, potentially serviceable by the sewer infrastructure that we have in the village. But obviously, the master plan for years has said, don't extend sewers beyond the area where we have sewers now because they induce growth. And they will have people asking for different zoning because if there's sewers, they can build more than they can build without them. By the same token, there have been people on Ski Hill and other locations replacing septic systems at $40,000 or $50,000 a pop for years. And frequently, once you spend your $40,000, you don't want the town to come in and put the sewers in that you're now going to have to abandon your septic system for. And so I'm not sure we have any good answers there, except that Paul says there's no way that's inexpensive to make gravity flow available to any significant number of neighborhoods that we're talking about there. So rather than continuing to raise an issue that I think if it ever becomes an issue that the governing body needs to look at, they'll make a decision because they'll be in a time where they have to. But I don't know that we can predetermine the right answer to the question when they get asked it. And I'm not sure that would be a good thing for us to do.
So I don't, Frank, I just kind of don't exactly understand what the answer is here in that I will tell you, I agree that there is a problem on 206 North, on the east side of 206 North. And those neighborhoods, we commissioned a study, which Mr. Farrow's firm did a couple of years ago, through the sewer utility to investigate that. And it did come up with the answers that you cited, that it's not an inexpensive proposition. But a certain number of people on in that neighborhood, had been forced to redo their septic, and maybe they're not, maybe they'd feel like, that they spent a lot of money and then somebody's going to fix the problems they've spent money for, but I don't think that the problem hasn't gone away. And the guy that the family that put a new septic system in 5 or 10 years ago, it's only maybe 15 or 20 years from having to do it again, perhaps. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree that it's something that we can say, yep, can't do anything about that. Let's take it out of the examination. But I don't have a good answer as to, I don't know.
Also, Frank, the way it's phrased is consideration should be given to revising the utility services plan. I think it makes sense to come back. Always consider it because of technology changes, engineering changes. It may become a much more accessible remedy than what we currently have.
That's
I will
fine.
say, I do know the argument, and
And it doesn't, I guess what we do know is that the study showed it was cost prohibitive under current
Right.
But
technology.
that study also.
And that doesn't mean,
But
that means
yeah,
that
there
you
was
spent
also
money.
issues with that study. That study also took the position that, man, DP approval would be really tough. I don't know that that's true. And so that was one, that was one position that was asserted that I don't necessarily agree with. I think that there's enough support to demonstrate that that neighborhood and the environment would be better off with sewer service than septic.
Yeah,
So,
I think you're probably right. I think you're probably right. Usually, it's interesting, I mean, there are ways to use certain emergency rules to service septic.
Right, and by the way, even the Highlands
But,
rules
yeah.
talk about those older neighborhoods with
Yeah.
failing septic, and that is one of the exceptions to promoting and expanding sewer service.
Yeah. But that sounds really expensive, so don't sign a municipal check for it. Let me tell
Right,
you.
but it is a public, it
That's
is
another one.
a,
Have it on the shelf, have it on the
Steve
shelf,
writes
hope
the
somebody
checks.
else pays for it.
it is a public health issue, so I think you're right that it's appropriate to keep. Redevelopment plan, I think as we work through the recommendations that are going to come out of this report, there may be some areas that the board says may merit consideration as redevelopment areas. If you say that, the governing body doesn't ever have to agree with you, and if they don't come back to you and say, we would like you to look at block X, lot X, lot Y, whatever, as a potential area in need of redevelopment, you'll never get to make that determination. So what you're really called on to do here is sort of look around, assess the way things have been going, and determine whether you think redevelopment and the tools that it makes available might be useful in changing anything that you want to change here, because what's there right now isn't working. And what we find out is that some of the things that aren't working don't look like there's anything really wrong. You know, down in Bridgewater, that Sanofi, all those Sanofi buildings that you see when you drive by the old research campus will be torn down. And if you go through them, walk in and look around, you would think, wow, I'd like to have an office here. It looks pretty nice. Functionally obsolete. We're going to be torn down and replaced with a mixed-use development. We're lucky because so far we haven't been hit with anything like that. I think we really got extremely lucky when we watched the north end of 206 get, repopulated with the office spaces that were purchased last year. So right now, the biggest threat that we have is the one that Steve and Larry have been talking about for the last year. And they've been on top of meeting with people over at AT&T and trying to find out where the tea leaves are going to lead us. And right now, I think the best thing we can do is try to be in a posture where, as we know what change is coming, we have a good idea in advance of where to try to steer it. Because if no changes come, Larry said this last time we talked about it, and it was a really good point. If for whatever reason AT&T decides to re-up for the next 20 years, then we're not looking for another solution for that site. But if it turns out that that is just another one of the single-user office locations in the Somerset Hills and Morris County and those kind of places that has outlived its usefulness for what it was, what's our vision for what it should be in the future? Because it's very strategically located, has tremendous infrastructure already available, including access to the road network. So we'll talk a little bit about redevelopment in the context of a couple of the sites that might make sense. But again, it'll be up to the governing body if they actually want to ask us to look and see if they should be redevelopment areas. So I think at this point, the Master Plan Review Committee is going to take some time with the Holtaway report so that we glean from it the kinds of things that should be included in this re-exam now. I suspect that there will be some items from that report that we will resolve ourselves to include in this right away, but that will be subjects for continuing discussion as part of a master plan amendment. So you may read some things here that say continue to or consider the possibility of, and then the follow-on is that you do the considering and you maybe make a change or maybe you don't. I think I've gotten from this conversation what I need to be able to reorganize this, meet with the subcommittee, and then give you a draft that we can talk about at the next meeting.
But, so I just have a quick question. So we've got 2008 recommendations, 2000 recommendations.
Yeah, you're not looking at any of the...
Recommendations from the committee, but what about 2018 recommendations that we may have independent of that?
Yeah, we're going to come, you're going to see a series of recommendations that the subcommittee's worked on and is working on in the first draft of the report. Whatever we haven't included that makes sense, the board's going to have the opportunity to review, comment on, and get those additions made to the report. So that, what I see is, the next time we talk about it, you're going to have the first draft, and the subsequent time we talk about it, you're going to have the adopted draft with the input from everybody that's had that. And I think for now, since we have other items on the agenda, I think that, like I say, I have enough to get back with the subcommittee and get the report written.
Okay, we want to set up a meeting for May. You want the first or
The 12th?
the second?
Second meeting in May.
Second meeting in May.
The planning that you're adopting it into June.
It'll be the 10th, Frank. May
May 10th?
Remember, it's not an amendment to the master rule.
Right.
You may have ideas like that you might put in here or you might not. So then don't worry about being all inclusive because you can always do another one.
Okay, thank you, Frank. That was
Thank you.
helpful, certainly. Okay, I think we have some people that are going to recuse themselves, and yes, I would like, Larry, yeah, go ahead. You
Okay.
want to talk about that right now?
Right, so the owners of Bellworks and Homedale have agreed to give the Bedminster Land Use Board and our professionals and staff a tour of the Bellworks facility so we can see what a single corporate campus that is converted to a multi-mixed-use project, what it looks like and how it operates, and the issues they have with affecting that conversion. So Trina had sent out an email to folks saying, you know, let's target end of April, beginning of May. I'll get dates down to them, and then we'll pick a date. It's going to be a work day, right? So it'll be, what was proposed was mid-morning or mid-afternoon, anticipate about 2 hours for the tour. So Trina has a couple dates that people have responded, but while we're all here together, if you can just check your calendars so we could nail this down tonight and pick a date for a couple weeks from now.
What do you have so far, Larry? Maybe
My vote
we
would be
can
for
go in
May.
that direction.
So we've got, let's see, for the week of the 23rd, Kathy and Ann are good for the Monday. Kathy, Anna, and Tom are good for the Tuesday. Kathy, oh, look who responded, Kathy, and it says Anna, but we know it.
I'm gone that whole week.
Okay, you're gone that week. The next week is the week of the
The week of
30th.
the 23rd.
Carol and Tom are good for that week. Kathy's good for that week, except for the Monday.
I like the May. I like the May.
You like May? All right.
I like May.
So that's May 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm good for any of those days.
Afternoon, any of the days of the week is good for me.
Larry, I'm really
1,
good
2, 3,
on
4.
Wednesdays and not good on any other day, so
1, 2, 3, 4.
roughly any Wednesday I can make it.
Yeah, any afternoon.
We're-
I can make that work with my new job.
If it's in the morning, mid-morning is better.
You can please some of the people some of the time.
I can't do Wednesday at all.
You can't do Wednesday at all.
Dancing around.
Yeah, I know. It's
Talk
not-
about hurting cats.
I gave you 10 good days.
We did. Kathy, you did.
Wednesday 25th? Or Wednesday, not in April at all?
Well, based upon what we just heard, I was looking at that first week in May,
Right.
And Anna, you don't have down Wednesday, you do it the Thursday and Friday down.
First week in May?
Yeah, that May 2nd.
I can probably do, we do morning or afternoon?
Well, some can do morning. Some can do afternoon.
I could work out Wednesday the 2nd.
Okay.
Maybe
I could do any day except maybe morning.
mid-morning is just kill the whole day.
Steve?
Just shoot it.
I don't know my schedule.
Yeah, I
Just
can't
pick
do
a
that
day off.
Wednesday at all. I can't do that Wednesday at all.
Shoot the whole day.
I'm booked that whole day already. May 2nd.
What about May 1st, that Tuesday?
Tuesday, I'm not good.
Après midi?
Lou can't do that.
I can do Tuesday, but it has to be late afternoon. I mean, you
Yeah.
figure out what you want to do, and if I can come, I'm more than happy to jump in there.
So Tuesday, late afternoon?
Might even be able to make that work too, Larry.
Second half
When,
of the
when,
day.
when we're saying late afternoon, we're saying like after 3 or something like that?
I'm thinking probably 3.
That works.
I could probably make that work.
So 3 to 5, and then
And
back
then
home
stroll
hour.
On the
Back
Garfield
home?
Parkway.
Yeah.
Back home?
What you said?
In that case,
No
then-
way. Tom Cox is taking us all out.
Fire up that bus.
You're going against construction.
I wish I had a meeting then.
Yeah, I do too.
Trina,
On Tuesday.
are you joining us?
I have to check with Judy.
Has a lot of things on her plate.
What day is that?
So I'm gonna go with Tuesday the 1st, afternoon as the preference, with the fallback, the afternoon of the 2nd.
Same
But
time.
we're, same time,
So May
Tuesday
2nd.
1, 3 p.m. And I will also reach out to the subcommittee to let them know and give them the opportunity. And did Frank just disappear?
He's trying to look at his calendar, but he
You can only see it by moonlight?
He had it in his, he has it in his.
It must have that good cell service.
It's his cell phone, right?
All right, I think that's the best we can do for now.
All right.
I used to go there for meetings all the time.
Oh, wow.
Sure.
So that's what you're saying?
You can tell us the differences.
May 1st at 3 with the 2nd as a fallback, but
Okay.
We used to put 6,000 people in there. I think so.
Really?
Okay.
Wow.
All right, we need to
You could drive the senior van and take everything.
have our
There you
hearing.
go.
God. You can load everyone in the bitty bus, there you go.
There you go.
Okay, so we need to have our hearing now, so I think there's a few people that need to recuse themselves and let these applicants get on the way here.
Why are people?
You got Jardine?
Well, the mayor and Larry, Larry.
So it's not a road adjustment.
So George, he has to recuse, and so does Lou. Well, Lou's across the street from it, and it's George's project.
Who else?
Oh, you're doing it 200 feet.
Okay, we're all ready for our hearing.
Been abandoned for like, since he was busy?
Jared and Air, how do you say that? Jared and
Been
Air.
abandoned since he was
Okay.
busy bee?
Good evening. My name is Greg D'Alessandro of Basking Ridge. I represent
Please,
Anthony Pellegrino, who is the contract purchaser of the property 84 Somerville Road.
Can you spell your last name, please?
Sure, B'*A*L-E-S-S-A-N-D-R-O.
These are my peeps now.
And Mr. Pellegrino is purchasing the property so that his son, Michael Pellegrino, who is the owner of Jardinier Fine Flowers, can occupy the property as a tenant. Jardinier is currently located right around the corner in Far Hills. They're looking to relocate their business to this site. They are a flower shop, which is a permitted conditional use in this zone. Though I don't believe florist is actually defined in the ordinance, but what he is looking to do is floral-related retail sales, event preparation, assembly of floral arrangements on site, for on-site sale and for off-site delivery, related office use, and parking of his delivery vehicles on the site. Basically the same business they're doing right now, which is by all means a florist. But that's what they're looking to do. We do require a conditional use variance, a D3 variance, because the building currently is approximately 3,600 square feet. It exceeds or this use would exceed the permitted 2,000 non-residential use to transform the existing site to this business. We believe that operating this as a flower shop, even notwithstanding it exceeding the 2,000 square foot non-residential use, would be consistent with the zoning. And we're prepared to present testimony to that effect. We're also seeking waivers, 3 waivers for tree removal, for access, and parking space side. Actually, I believe there's a 4th waiver also for lighting based on the engineering comments that we will present testimony to as well. Tonight I have our engineer Paul Fox, our planner John Peel, as well as Anthony Pellegrino and Michael Pellegrino. With that said, I'd like to present our first witness, Paul Fox.
Sure. Sure. And I'd like to, why don't we have all 4 witnesses come forward and stand and be sworn? So, gentlemen, and if the elder, Mr. Pellegrino, would like to testify, just in case we go out of order. Gentlemen, please raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. And starting on my right, your left. I'm sorry. Starting on my left, your right. Right next to the attorney, Mr. D'Alessandro. Please state your name and address.
Michael Pellegrino.
And Mike, what is your address? At least the business address.
Sorry, the business address?
In either address.
It is 43 Route 202, Far Hills.
Thank you.
Anthony Pellegrino,
And, Anthony, what is your address?
Your address.
1008 Carteret Road, Bridgewater, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Paul Fox with Apgar Associates, 13 Demond Place in Far Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, and we'll confirm the record that the board recognizes and accepts Mr. Fox's qualifications as a professional engineer. Go ahead, Mr. Peel.
John Peel with P.K. Environmental, 205 Main Street, Chatham, New Jersey. I'll be qualified as an environmental
Recognizes and accepts Mr. John Peel's qualifications as an environmental consultant and a professional planner. So please go ahead. Thank you. If you ever do have to speak, please come up to the mic. Okay? Thank you.
I guess, Mr. Fox, it's probably best if you can lay out the application, just explain the waivers that are going to be sought. Sure, thanks.
This application is for the piece of property immediately adjacent to Miller Lane. It's at the corner of Miller Lane and Somerville Road on Route 202. The property was last approved for a daycare use in 1995. This was the Disney Bumblebee site. We prepared the plans for it at that time. There was originally a residence located here in the property. This portion of the structure was built to house the daycare operations. This portion remained as a residence at the time. We built a parking area in front here, as well as a gravel parking in the rear. That was all approved in 1995. Subsequently, the daycare use was discontinued, and for the most part of the last 10 years, the structure in front has not been used for anything. The residence has been continued to use as a residential use. So the proposal today is to use the daycare part of the building as well as the residential part of the building for the proposed forest use, with this part of the building being used for most of the work related to putting together the floral arrangements, and the former residential part of the structure being used for the business offices and consultations with clients. The proposal would not change the exterior of the building. There are no proposed changes to the outside of the building. The proposed changes to the inside of the building are fairly straightforward. The residential portion would be used for offices rather than a dwelling, and a single staircase would be constructed within the former daycare area to allow employees to go down to the basement where a lot of things will be stored, the flowers and whatnot. So it's easier access rather than having to go outside the building, which is the only access to the basement presently. The proposal that we are providing tonight would expand the rear parking area and pave it. So where there are 5 parking spaces in front at this point, plus another parking space in the existing garage, there would be an additional 14 space parking area built in the back, along with a loading and unloading area for the floral business. As Mr. Ferraro commented, the circulation presently on the driveway is for both in and out. We were requesting permission from the Township Committee to construct an access out onto Miller Lane, so one-way traffic flow would be utilized, and instead of traffic exiting from this driveway, the traffic would exit from Miller Lane. That has better sight distance than the existing driveway in terms of pulling out onto Somerville Road or Route 202. With respect to the width of this driveway, since this is one-way traffic, it was proposed for a 12-foot width. The township regulations, the standard for a commercial driveway is 24 feet. So we're asking for a design waiver for 12 feet since it's only a one-way driveway. Additionally, we're requesting a waiver from the dimensions of the parking spaces because normally the required parking space dimension is 20 feet long. Because there's space for overhang vehicles, it's normal to have an 18-foot deep parking space instead. This is sheet 2 that I'm speaking from, the site plan sheet. This has not been changed at all. It's exactly what was submitted to the board. Looking at sheet 4 of the plans, which provides the grading and stormwater. Stormwater management will be via a drainage inlet in the center of the new parking area that will collect runoff from the parking area as well as the building and transport it to underground dry wells adjacent to the parking lot. This will allow the stormwater to recharge the groundwater table and mitigate off-site impacts from runoff. We're also proposing 5 new parking lot fixtures, light fixtures for the rear parking area and the driveway to provide the required illumination per the township code. Mr. Farrar pointed out that the existing site fixtures in front of the building that were improved as part of the 1995 site plan are no longer meet the township requirements. Because those lights are do have the illumination, the actual light bulb in the hood of the fixture, so it is shielded. We're requesting a waiver to continue to use those fixtures, not have to replace them as part of this operation. That would be the 4th waiver. The one last waiver, I'm sorry, that would be the 3rd waiver. The 4th waiver we're requesting is the planting plan. Because of the number of trees that we're removing, we're required to provide 15 replacement trees. In this instance, the number of replacement trees is simply unnecessary given the size of the site and the density of the existing plantings. So we're requesting a waiver from compliance with the required 15 replacement trees, subject to consultation with the Landscape Advisory Committee. Just a few of the items from Mr. Ferrero's review. He did mention that with respect to the site, there are some wetlands all the way at the very bottom of the site, sort of adjacent to where the firehouse is. We're quite a distance from that. Mr. Pugh will testify as to those, but we're not within 150 feet of those wetlands. With respect to, Mr. Ferraro commented on there's a number of white PVC standpipes that are sticking up out of the ground on the site. Those were simply installed as part of a prior development analysis to do some studies of the soil. Those would all be removed as part of this project. I think that's all I have for the board tonight. Was there any questions?
Mr. Fox, a 12-foot driveway, is that actually going to provide enough access? Should an emergency vehicle need to get through there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's one of the things that we discussed with Paul, really, when we started looking at the initial planning for this, with ultimately having a secondary access from Miller Lane is really helpful from an
It's a great idea because it's an underused road, so.
Yeah, so it really helps out in terms of making it much easier if there's an EMS response to the site required.
Do you plan on putting any signs up,
Yes, this sign here that we include on sheet 2 of our plan, there's an existing sign which the daycare had approved. Right now, it's just being used to put the real estate sign, but essentially, this sign would be put exactly where the signposts are provided. It's going to fit right in there. Mr. Ferraro did point out that the existing lighting for the sign is no longer conforming with the current township standards, so we would upgrade that as part of this approval. With respect to the rest of the comments from Mr. Ferraro, we didn't have any objection to complying with them.
How are the flowers delivered to the basement? Is there
There's actually, where the loading and unloading area is here, there's a wide exterior stairwell that goes down to the basement right here.
Okay, and that's how it'll go right into
Exactly. As part of the improvements, there would be a walk-in cooler in the basement for storage.
Yeah, I saw that.
and things.
And what kind of trucks bring the flowers in?
Right.
And how large are the trucks?
Mr. Pellegrino will testify to that as part of his testimony.
Is the first floor access to the loading dock?
Looks like the entrances seem to be on the other side of the building.
This is all one floor, so generally speaking, the employees are going to be parking in the rear of the property, and they will access right through this sidewalk into the first floor of the building. The majority of the floor area is located on the first floor of that structure.
Okay, so that's a door and not a window on these plans?
Yes, that's right.
Are the other openings on the first floor, that big open part, are they windows or doors? Because it looks like there's an entry point by the ramp, and then there's an entry point on the enclosed porch. Alright, so there's a door here, and there's a door here. Is this a door?
Yes, that's correct.
And is this a door?
No, that's a window. I'm sorry, this
And
is
are these
actually,
doors?
Do you have larger scale drawings that we can look at? Because these are eye tests.
Yeah.
oh, sure. Unfortunately, I didn't bring enough for the whole board, but I do have
If you have one or two, maybe
We
that
can
side of the
share.
table and this side of the table, we can share them a little bit, 'cause I can't read a thing on these.
Yeah, all the letters blended together.
I just got new glasses too, and I can't.
Taking off your glasses, bro.
Oh, this one? Yeah. They can share.
we have enough. I
You
think.
can't tell if it's a slider or not, right? It's like, just looks like a window. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Yes, there is a door at that location.
So is this a Is it a slider, is it a,
This door right here is
this
just,
door is,
it's actually right in the center. It's just not shown for some reason.
okay.
Again, nothing's being changed about that. That was actually just a rear exit for children to go out there.
And that's concrete now, this path, this exterior walkway is all existing?
This would be essentially a customer entrance.
And the retail portion,
Let's not all talk at once. Let's ask a question of the professional, please.
and this front portion is the retail portion?
That's correct.
If you have a question, ask Mr. Fox, please. I'm okay, I can see, I'm fine.
Regarding the parking, what was the reason that you had to cut it down to 18? Are you really coming right up against the easement? Is that what the issue is?
We're actually expanding the amount of parking from what was there before.
Okay.
So our proposed total number of parking will be 20 spaces. I believe the original amount of parking, let me just verify that on the plan from the phone plan, but I believe it was around 12 or 15. So it was 6 spaces in the front and then another 5 spaces in the back.
So decreasing this allows you to get more space. I'm trying to figure out why that is.
And how many people do we expect to have here on a regular basis?
Yeah.
Sure, okay, that's all right.
Use questions.
Yeah, I have other questions too, but. Okay, is there any other questions?
I'm still struggling with the parking.
Okay.
So the parking, they're going to park in the back and then have to walk around to the front of the building to go in, or are you going to have an entrance in from the back?
There's an existing entrance on the side of the building that faces Miller Lane
And is that going to be the main entrance?
for employees only. The main entrance for customers will actually be right in the front, as a front parking.
Oh, you want to put that over?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
And the reason why you're not able to put the additional trees in that you're asking for variance for?
Given the existing planting density on the site, it just isn't necessary.
Another quick question for you here. I'm looking at you're showing a ramp, okay, coming out of what I assume is going to be the public entrance on the 5 parking space side.
That's correct.
So now, this ramp is only going to go so far, right? Because you have parking right in front of it.
No, that's the existing, Jeff.
No, that's the existing, I
That's the
understand. Yeah, but you're still going to have a piece of
Yeah.
ramp here.
Okay,
That's what I'm saying. So where does that ramp end?
here.
Okay.
This ramp comes all the way down here to the handicap parking space.
Okay, so the whole thing is a ramp.
Yes, and all
Okay.
that's existing.
So then that means everybody who's parking in the non-handicap spots is going to have to walk to the left and then back up the ramp to get into the building.
That's right.
Okay.
Ultimately, though, it's not a very, the actual curb height above the ramp here is only about 8 inches. So it's really not much more than...
But you will need a handrail there, though, so that people don't trip on it.
That's correct, through here.
So it'd be an accessible, I mean, I guess it's like a ramp that's 12 inches, like one or 12. Okay, so, all right.
Is the main entrance at the porch or?
Do we overhang onto the ramp, the cars? The nose of the car, does it go over?
That's right, the sidewalk is wide enough.
So the rail is offset from
That's right. It would actually be on the indoor side.
on the house side, building
Rich,
side.
you want to ask your question?
You got it.
I'm a little confused. All right, so you said that the main entrance for the public is going to be at the top of that ramp that runs the long side of the big open space,
That's right.
right?
They could actually...
Yet there's a porch and an entrance to what is called a reception area
On the other side.
on the other side. And
Right.
the reception area is not the main entrance.
They could actually use either entrance.
This looks like this is
Mr.
the basement
Pellegrino
where
can testify more to that in terms of the overall village.
These go together.
Yeah, but it's, the whole thing slopes.
Okay.
Back it's exposed out.
So where's,
Mr. Pellegrino does questions. Okay.
And you can go out of order, it's fine.
showroom is in the large open space or at the reception?
Let's finish with Mr. Fox, please, and then we'll go on to the next witness, okay? Is there anything more from Mr. Fox from the board?
The lighting waiver. You're asking for not to have to come up to speed with the lighting.
Right, the existing site lighting that was approved in 1995 had the source of illumination, the bulb, in the ceiling of the fixture, but not the reflector. The reflector is below the ceiling. The current lighting standard requires that both the bulb and the reflector have to be up in the roof of the fixture. So we're just asking for a waiver for those fixtures.
Height of fixture.
Exactly.
You don't have the detail?
Exactly.
Do you have the detail of that light?
Actually, the detail on that light, I believe, is included on the original Busy Bee site plan, but I don't have it on our plans, no, because it's not a proposed fixture.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the public. Is there any?
Can I ask that?
Yes.
Is the engineering department okay with the lighting?
Yeah, we actually, I had a conference call with Mr. Fox and Paul Ferrero today, and we went over Mr. Ferrero's letter in detail. We don't object to any of the waivers that he's requesting, and provided that all, that he addresses all of the other comments, which are really minor technical comments on any approved plans, we're generally okay with it.
Okay, but the lighting has the right illumination and, at the border of the property. I mean, I don't know the details, but there's all kinds of numerical constraints on lighting.
Well, I don't believe the lighting levels were provided on the plan, so we don't actually know the existing levels, and that was one of the comments, was to provide the illumination levels.
Oh,
So
we don't know if the light's okay.
We currently don't know. So by agreeing to the comments, I presume any revised plans would show that. And what that entails is going out there at night with a light meter and recording the levels, seeing if they're too bright, too low.
Meet the requirements.
Right.
So the
I
lighting
think if
fixture may in the end need to be changed.
Actually, we did a full lighting analysis of the proposed fixture area back here, and we do demonstrate that along the property line, we meet the 0.1-foot candle indication of the township code, and also the required illumination levels within the parking area.
Okay, so that does meet our
Oh, yes, it was
lighting
specifically designed for
requirements, may not the physical structure of the
Actually, the proposed fixtures in this area do meet all the township requirements. Mr. Ferraro's comment was just with respect to the existing fixtures that were part of the 1995 approval. Essentially approving a waiver for the current waiver for those existing fixtures, so we don't have to change those out.
But even those fixtures meet the requirements of today.
In terms of the illumination levels, yes, it's just not the design of the fixture.
Gotcha.
The style of it.
Right.
All right, I understand.
Okay.
I have one
Yeah, go
more quick
ahead.
question, and I may have missed the answer, so I apologize if you're
No,
covering
go right
ground
ahead.
again. What's the reason that the back parking lot isn't extended another 4 feet to accommodate the two 20-foot parking spaces? The parking spaces have to be cut down to 18 feet?
Right, that's what I was asking.
It's simply not necessary. It's a typical design standard to only have them be 18 foot long. It's not required for today's cars. It's just not a necessary dimension. So it's a routine waiver because there's the space for the car to overhang. So ultimately, the car has 20 feet to park in. What we're doing is we're reducing that impervious surface that we have to construct on the site. So it kind of helps from perspective of how much green space we're losing, how much stormwater we're generating.
there again, engineers okay with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Typically, we would require the full 20 feet if the spaces were head-on. If, you know, if there was no curb separating, no curb island, if cars were parking head-on, then you would want the extra 2 feet. But since they're parking and the nose of the bumper will go over the curb, you actually have the extra 2 feet over the curb, so no objection.
All right, let's open it up to the public. If the public has any questions regarding Mr. Fox's testimony? Yes, come on up, put your name and address, please. Could you give her the mic, Mr. Fox? From there's fine,
Either mic.
just as long as you have the mic, so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
My name is Nancy DiCarlo, and I live at 110 Somerville Road, which is just a couple buildings on the same side up from the corner property. If I'm understanding correctly, the entrance for customers would be in off of Somerville Road into that current driveway,
That's correct.
and they would be parking in the front.
That is
So
correct.
that all delivery trucks would be through that back entrance?
That's correct.
Off of Miller Lane?
Correct.
That'd be trucks and all of that. Two concerns I have, just the hours of operation, that the business would be open. There is a school bus stop on the corner of Miller Lane and Somerville Road. There are children that live in the neighborhood. There are residences on both sides of your property, just so that, you know, that's kind of taken into consideration with that driveway. The amount of traffic on Somerville Road, the school buses that have to stop there, which is already a dangerous spot for traffic to stop. And the other concern I have is with the lighting in the rear parking lot, if that's going to be on at night.
Nancy, I don't mind you speaking, but I didn't realize you were going to testify, so if you
No, I'm
would...
not just asking questions.
Well, it's hard, so I don't mind you going a little bit out of order. So please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
And so feel free to both explain things and ask questions, okay?
But my final question was regarding the lighting in the back parking area. If that would be on all night or certain hours, or if it's low-level lighting, just so, you know, out of consideration to the residents and their use of their backyards.
The lighting would only be used during the business hours and a half hour before and a half hour after. The only light that would probably stay on overnight for security purposes is the one over by the loading, unloading area where the entrance to the basin is, just really a safety issue. Otherwise, the rest of the fixtures, we would not be necessary to have them on.
Okay, it's kind of low-level lighting, so that's not big glaring.
Oh, definitely not. The new lighting is all designed to be full cutoff, so it's only directed downward.
Okay, those are my questions. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is it intentions to have traffic going in from Miller Road as well, or just out of the?
It would also be going in for Miller Road.
So you could come in from Miller?
That's
okay.
right. We made the entrance wide enough so it could be used for both in and
Yeah, I
out.
think that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay, I think we're ready for the next witness. Yes?
It's Michael Pellegrino.
Uh-huh, right.
So Mike, could you describe your business? Sure. So we're a retail flower shop. We've been in Far Hills I've been there for 20 plus years. Started with my high school job. Started delivering and just loved it so much that started doing design and then rolled into buying the business probably 15 years ago. It's been great. But we're running out of space. We've been running out of space for years. We have currently probably 1,500 square feet, and it's just not enough. We have our offices, our cooler, and probably about 8 to 10 employees typically on any, Monday through Thursday. We swell up a little bit towards the weekend, so it's just really, it's been tight. It's been tight for years. We make our arrangements, and then we deliver them to a holding facility in Middlesex. It's been really difficult, so I'm trying to work a little smarter. So this space would be amazing for us, my family, and my employees.
So, just in your business, so you said retail, but what else, so you,
So we do events, that's our main focus. We don't do a tremendous amount of your daily walk-in activity. It's mostly weddings, events, special events, things like that. So we're busier on like a Saturday or Sunday than we are on Monday through a Friday. So we get busy on that Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday. That's our busier time.
what kind of customers do you have come to the site?
It's more meetings than it is, again, a retail customer. We'll have those Mother's Day, there's a busy one, Easter, things like that, but it's usually, you know, during the week is our meetings, our clients that we're meeting for weddings or events. Throughout the week, the funerals and things like that, they would come in, but mostly it's weddings and events that we're doing.
And then you'll assemble the flowers on site?
So the idea is that we would have our offices in the residential space right now. We would have, it's a 3-bedroom home. So we would have a small retail section, our consultation room, and our offices in the 3-bedroom home. Where the Busy Bee would be our production. So we would make everything on that first floor. The staircase would allow us to kind of hold everything down the basement, and then there's the staircase that leads outside where we would load our vans and deliver to where our functions are.
What kind of vehicles do you currently have?
We have 4 vans, 1 small van that we kind of bounce around throughout the day, and then the bigger, larger vans is what we use for the weekend. So we currently have 4 vehicles.
And what's the most number of employees you have at any one time right now?
So again, when we swell up on a Thursday or Friday, it's probably about 12 to, let's say 14, roughly. 14 would be sort of our max number right now, this week, or like a Mother's Day, be about 14 people.
Do you see it getting any bigger in the future?
Well, I mean, slightly bigger. It would be nice to grow slightly, that's the idea, right? Slightly bigger. So I would say maybe 18 would be our sort of our max number that we would want.
And how's product delivered, or flowers delivered to the site? What sort of materials do you get delivered?
So our delivery is usually anywhere from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And our the one truck that comes first thing in the morning is probably like a 16-foot box truck, a shorter box truck. The one that comes in the afternoon, 9 o'clock, is just a regular van that would come. It's just the 2 suppliers that we have. So it's a morning delivery. There's the rare occasion that we would have an 18-wheeler, and that's 4 times a year when we get 1 large load of glass or something to that effect. And that's usually an afternoon delivery. Hopefully they would just pull onto Miller Lane, unload us, and get out, or pull through and leave. But again, probably 4 times a year is when we see something like that.
And as Mr. Fox testified, all those type of deliveries would come through Miller Lane through that entrance, not off Somerville Road.
Sure, absolutely.
What do you envision with the exterior of the building? Are you making any changes to the exterior?
Maybe some minor landscaping. I mean, it could use a little freshening up. You know, that's about it. You know, it's got siding on it. You know, minor landscaping is really what we would be doing. I can't really envision you doing too much.
What about outside storage of product or display of product or merchandise outside?
Well, with 2,000 square feet and 2,000 square feet in the basement, I don't really foresee having much storage outside. That's what we're struggling right now with, space. And this would give us the space that we need.
I don't have any other further questions.
Open up to the board. Questions?
How big are those vans you own?
It's a Ford Transit, so it's
Longer than 18 feet at all?
18 feet. No, it fits in a parking space, if that's what you're...
So they're not extended cabs or extended boxes or
No.
anything like that? No 100% cut flowers in your facility? No potted plants?
Sorry?
No potted or need for greenhouse facilities or anything like that?
We do plantings, and what we do is we buy for a job, and we do the job. So no, not really a storage of of those plants. There might be some interior plants, household plants, things like that, but we do a fall planting or say a spring planting, so we'll have product and we go do the job. We only buy for that job, we don't really store.
And you're not a nursery, you're not raising plants.
No, we're not.
No plans for a greenhouse on the site at any point?
No.
Are you moving your entire operation from Far Hills to this location, or are you keeping both sites?
We would be moving everything to this location.
Okay, and then I was looking at Mr. Fox's parking lot here, and I see parking for 14 vehicles plus the loading dock. So if you have 14 employees working, say on a Friday or Saturday, and you have 4 vans, which one of them or 2 of them may be there at the time, just parked,
Sure.
where are the overflow people going to park?
So we've got the 2 spaces, right, that we can probably put 2 vans, because of the loading dock, if we
Okay.
can back to back, right? We can, if we had to, we can utilize the front spots we haven't used there. Really, I don't get a retail walk-in traffic, so that would be the 1 or 2 cars that might park there in any given day.
Just the thing to keep in mind too is, I mean, there would not be people parking on Miller Lane at any time, because, our whole town's EMS needs to be able to get through it all.
Sure.
So that, some people would never want to block that.
Sure, I'm
Sure,
sure.
there's also a massive parking lot
Right,
on that road,
exactly.
too. I mean, in the
Right,
event
right
of
across the
really
street from our,
crazy overflow.
fire department and, rescue, all that, so.
Do you have hours on Sundays?
Usually what we, no, we don't. What would I do is if we had an event, we would handle the event. That is my day off.
Theoretically.
So no.
Get one of those?
I don't know if this would go back to Mr. Fox or not, or there's another person who can testify to it, but to question here, you said 3 or 4 times a year, maybe more, there's a tractor trailer that needs to come on site?
Occasionally, yes.
I can't imagine a tractor trailer entering on this small site with much ease, but has that been looked at? How a tractor, without having to park on Miller Lane for anything more than 2 minutes?
He said they would park, he thinks they'll park on Miller Lane and they'll unload very quickly, so.
It's usually 1 pallet that they would be dropping off. It's not like we're unloading a tractor trailer, but that's just how it comes from this one particular company that we buy from.
Okay.
Anybody else on the board?
What are the hours of operation?
So, I'm there all the time, but.
Sure you don't want that apartment? Might not need a variance.
We're there a little earlier, we're there a little later, standard 9 to 5. Monday through Saturday.
Okay. All right, I'll open up to the public. Do you have any questions for this witness? Seeing none, we'll close. Okay, next witness.
Next witness, John Peel. Mr. Peel, can you address from a planning perspective whether the applicant meets the necessary criteria for the granting of a D3 variance?
Try. As was described earlier, the florist use is a permitted use of, permitted conditional use within this district. The issue here is that there's a deviation from the standards for commercial use, primarily floor area. It's not floor area ratio, it's specifically the floor area. The limit is 2,000 square feet. The existing building is about 3,600 square feet, give or take. So we're not expanding the building, we're not expanding any structure on site. It's just using all of the available square footage. So the site, the building accommodates the proposal in this, as part of the conditional use. It's a D3 variance relief that's being sought as a use variance. And, with respect to the fact that just using the existing facility, no proposed changes cause any substantial detriment to the public good and won't impair the purpose of the zone, plan, or ordinance. It's pretty straightforward, actually. It's a conditional use. but it requires a use variance D3 for the deviation from that standard. So in my opinion, there's no impact to the design plan.
Is the applicant complying with all the remaining standards under the ordinance, other than the square footage of non-residential use?
Yes, yes it is. And maybe we'll describe the waivers, but those are the,
And it still remains appropriate for that zone, even though it's exceeding the 2,000 square foot of non-residential use?
yeah, and again, I think the site and the building itself just accommodates the proposed use. Like, ideally, it's the ideal use.
Can you describe the wetlands on the property? I know there was some question in the engineering plan about that.
Yeah, there's, at the base of the hill all the way in the back, there's a wetland area, there's an intermittent creek inside that wetland. I get all the work from the firehouse over there, so I'm looking at from the other angle, but they're not anywhere near within 150 feet of a regulated wetland or water course, so it's no need to deal with the DEP on this one. That's about it.
Any questions on the board?
So the variance you're requesting is already for an existing condition. We're not changing anything. We just need the variance.
Well, there is a little bit, they're eliminating the residence, which
I see.
increases the space of the commercial over
I
the
see.
2,000, so it's the increase from 2,000 to the full building.
So if they had actually intended to use it as a residence,
Yeah, that's right.
and there wouldn't have been any
If they didn't tell us about the
variance.
office and just
Okay.
lived there,
Okay.
they could probably say it's conforming, and it sounds like he lives there. I feel a little sorry for him.
Okay.
We cut it and come back without the variance.
Okay, board, any more? No? No, okay. The public, I'll open up, yes.
Yes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Ryan Hagerty, Bedminster. Could you elaborate on the tree waiver?
I'll defer to Paul.
I'm sorry, I asked the wrong.
Oh, I don't mind.
You limit my,
Sure. The applicant is proposing to remove trees in order to accommodate the new parking area here. And in accordance with the township requirements, when you calculate the number of required replacement trees, it comes to 15. We're requesting a waiver for only installing 9 based on the existing density of plantings around the site and the additional 9 trees that we're proposing.
This is why it's good to slow me down. Could you give us an indication? I think 9 is 60% of 15, and just to think of what Warren looked like when I first went to work there about 15 or 20 years ago, what Burnsville first looked like about 8 years ago when my son started high school, 60% trees as opposed to 100% trees, what the kind of ratios are in those areas. Just give us an idea of what fewer trees looks like.
I don't think I can provide testimony with respect to this. I can tell you that when this was originally developed for the Busy Bumblebee daycare, there was really no plantings in the area where the building was. So a lot of the plantings, the mature plantings that you see now were actually planted as a result of that. But in terms of the ratio that you're talking about, I guess I couldn't really speak to that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none? I'll leave it to you you want to sum anything up, or?
Really, briefly, obviously, the florist already is a conditional use here. We're just exceeding the 2,000 square feet of non-residential use, just up to the existing site as it is. It's really not going to look much different than it is, and you know, the issue is, notwithstanding that we're exceeding the 2,000 square feet, given that a florist already is an acceptable use, does exceeding that make it no longer an acceptable use? And think it really isn't any change. It really is an acceptable use, even though we're exceeding the 2,000 square feet. And therefore, we're asking for this D variance to be granted, as well as the waivers that we've been requested also be granted.
And Mr. D'Alessandro, does the applicant or his father already own the built property, or?
Not yet, no, so
Okay.
they are under contract.
Okay. But the changes are pretty straightforward, I think, so is it something you would like to be able to proceed effective immediately after tonight if all other requirements are met?
Yes, so the sooner we can get approval, the sooner we can close on the property. It's a contingency in our contract that we get these approvals. And I know Mr. Pellegrino is desperate to move his business and get functioning.
Okay, we have a procedure that we use that might help, so that's fine, thank you very much.
Just one last comment. Mr. Pellegrino, Anthony Pellegrino is the contract purchaser. When we do close, if we are successful in getting these approvals, he will be taking title in an LLC. He just had the name of that, which is Tirreni, T-I-R-R-E-N-I LLC.
That's fine, and you don't have to tell us that now. I mean, you can make a transfer that you can sign all of his rights to them. So,
Thank you.
So,
Tom, is there just one other thing?
Yeah.
Do they need to go to the town for permission to use the Miller Road?
I believe they said one of the conditions
Yeah,
is that they're
okay.
going to get a driveway access permission.
Okay.
They have to get that from the township committee, and I think they understand that. That is very important to your process, that, you know, we don't approve cutting into the curbs and driving into the township road. The township committee approves that, and I think you saw that in Paul Ferrero's review report. So, work with Paul Ferrero and get the consent of the township committee. It's a condition. Everything in the review reports will be a condition, so if the board is ready, you're thinking about a motion to approve the D variance and site plan, preliminary final site plan, and the site plan design exceptions that were requested, and to make it effective this evening so that they could proceed effective immediately, provided all other conditions, including the driveway access, are approved. And that those conditions were the ones offered by the applicant and explained by the township engineer in his review report, and Mr. Banish in his review report. They're not proposing any major changes to the exterior of the building, and so that's been offered as what they're proposing to do. And I don't know if the board had any other conditions that you were thinking of.
I think you've covered it, Tom.
Yep.
So do we hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Mr. Strackoff?
Yeah, I think it's a great use of a building that's sat vacant for a fair amount of time, so I certainly approve.
Ms. Christie?
Aye, and I do look forward to seeing new landscaping now.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye, good luck to
Mr.
you.
Travaglini?
All right, good luck.
Ms. Patrick?
Aye.
And Ms. Crenshaw?
Aye. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Good luck to you.
Go right ahead. Thank you. I didn't write on the wall.
Hey, John,
Okay, let's have an adjournment, please. Can I hear a motion
Yes.
to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. What? It's a legal issue, Nick, they keep saying to keep it on there.
One of my
Wyatt's here.